logistics catch-up. After the salon at 2:30, I'll be starting my walking tour of Broadway. So if you're here for my walking tour, just sit tight. And if you're not, maybe think about joining us for the 20 minutes we'll spend up here getting the tour set up. So let's get started. On my left, this is Paul Greenstein. This is Dydia DeLyser. Dydia doesn't like to use a microphone, so I'm going to turn it off and we're going to see what happens. Go.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks to Richard and Kim for inviting us here today, and thanks to all of you for spending some of your Sunday afternoon with us. Can you guys in the back of the room hear me okay? All right, thanks. Wave if you just want me to talk louder if I drift into quietude. Okay? You can hear me, Paul?
What?
Well, by way of introduction to this topic and to the paper that we're going to present today, I'm going to actually do the talking and Paul's going to interrupt me in helpful or unhelpful ways as we go. Paul's been working on neon signs. He's been designing and installing neon signs around Los Angeles since the late 1970s. Mid-1970s.
We're starting already. And by the way, I wanted to let you know that I grew this mustache this morning because I knew that there was something about the Senate studios. I thought that would be helpful. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
About 3 years ago, I started getting really interested in the work that Paul was doing, and I started looking into what was published about neon. And of course, there are a number of really beautiful coffee table books about neon signs. There are now 2 new books that just came out about the history of neon in the United States, but they're about the history of representations of neon signs in literature, art, film, and music. So they're not. So what I realized was there is no history of neon and neon signs published at this point. So I began doing the research for that book, and I've been in Los Angeles doing that research all year while on sabbatical. And Paul and I embarked on some research together when we started asking some questions that apparently hadn't been asked before. So if you've ever looked into the history of neon in the United States at all, then you've probably come across this photograph, at least at some point. Because this photo...
Can you step aside?
You're walking... Well, you can stand on my
Let's
side.
go home.
That's fine.
No. Fucking.
You may have seen this image before. Chances are, if you did, it was a very poor quality reproduction. As far as I'm aware, this is the first time that a good reproduction of it has ever been shown, except at a talk I did for the Palisades Historical Society a couple weeks ago. And I showed the same photo. If you Google, the first neon sign in the United States, you'll get pictures of this sign. Pretty much everybody who talks about neon points to this Packard sign as the first neon sign in the United States. All the websites indicate that Packard sign, Earl C. Packard sign, erected in 1923 at the corner of 7th and Flower, just down the road here. It's also in every published source. That begins with, screwed that up. That begins with Signs of the Times themselves. They're the authoritative, Signs of the Times is the authoritative magazine that has covered the sign industry since 1906. They mentioned it. It goes all the way down until even an as yet unpublished article coming out in Signs of the Times in December will declare that that sign was the first neon sign in the country. And the most recently published 2 books about the history of neon, they all mention it. So when I started doing this research, well, naturally, I figured, of course, it's true. So I thought, well, let's just, look in the Los Angeles Times real quick. Los Angeles Times is searchable on ProQuest if you have access through your library. So you can search ads, you can search classified ads, you can search obituary, you can search any word, you can search the word the. You can search any word that comes up in the Los Angeles Times, and I looked for everything, Earl C. Packard, neon, whatever. There wasn't anything in the Los Angeles Times. So I tried an old-fashioned search. Instead of an online search, the photomorg and the clippings files from the Los Angeles Times are at UCLA Special Collections. I went there, I looked through that, there was nothing. Well, and Paul thought, well, you know what? It turns out that in 1922, Earl C. Anthony, the man who owned the Packard dealership, that had supposedly the neon sign, he launched a radio station with radio towers on his roof in 1922, the radio station called KFI, you may be familiar with it, and KFI was linked to the Examiner. And we thought, well, maybe because KFI was connected to the Examiner, Harry Chandler at the Times didn't want to cover anything related to Earl C. Anthony anymore. Maybe that's why it wasn't in the paper. Well, the Examiner's not searchable online via ProQuest or anything else. And rather than go to their morgue, which is at USC, I did something different. It turns out that the Earl C. Anthony Company had a clipping service. This is something that was common all throughout the teens, 20s, 30s. People who were famous or businesses that were in the news a lot, they'd hire a clipping service to clip every ad they ran, every article written about them. Amelia Earhart had such a clipping service. Lots of famous people in those days will have these clippings albums. Well, Earl C. Anthony Packard had a clipping service, and they had 54 clippings albums. Earl C. Anthony Packard went out of business in the early 1960s, but the albums, the 54 huge albums, I mean, they're about this big, 54 albums were saved by one of the former employees and eventually handed down to a Packard car club that has its headquarters in Santa Ana. They have all the albums. So these are all the clippings about anything related to Earl C. Anthony Packard at all, right? Okay, so, well, what's in the albums? This is every newspapers that you've never even heard of that don't exist anymore. Every newspaper in California was clipped in these albums. Okay, well, it turns out that Earl C. Anthony was very well covered. He was a very prominent person in the teens, 20s, 30s in Los Angeles, and he was very well covered, so there's a lot about him in the albums. Like, for example, he buys property to build a house on, it makes the papers. When his overcoat got stolen, it was in the papers. When he got a new dog, that was in the papers. So there's no shortage of coverage, right? There's no shortage of coverage of Mr. Earl C. Anthony. Neither is there any shortage of coverage of his car business. He was a very prominent car dealer, and Packard, of course, an expensive mark, so there was quite a bit of coverage of that. For example, when Anthony got the dealerships for the distributorship for the entire state of California, there was a lot of coverage of that. When Anthony developed a different way of selling used cars and separated the used car business from the new car business, that made the papers. When Anthony opened a brand new car building in Los Angeles, a brand new car building in Los Angeles in 1929, that made the papers. But there wasn't anything about an Earl C. Anthony Packard neon sign. This sign that supposedly stopped traffic for weeks, that caused all kinds of problems for the Los Angeles Police Department as they had to redirect traffic from people stopping to look at the sign. It not only wasn't in the Los Angeles Times, it wasn't in any newspaper. So we asked ourselves then, where did the story come from? Right? Nobody had ever, none of those other sources, no website, no published source, had ever traced this down to an original first-person primary source at all. Now there's no newspaper coverage. There has also never been a photograph published anywhere of that sign in its original location. So where does the story about the sign come from? Okay, well, the sign supposedly came from France, from the company Claude Neon that really developed neon signs. Claude Neon Lights opened as a franchise of the original French Claude Neon, so it's a kindred company, it's not the same company. So in 1927, Claude Neon Lights took out a big ad in the New York Times. They were by then pushing their neon product very hard in their market. Claude Neon Lights was not the French company. It was a franchise of the French company working out of New York. And they were pushing very hard in the late 20s. And what they wrote, you can see here, in 1923, Mr. Earl C. Anthony, the California Packard distributor, imported a Claude Neon tube electric sign from Paris. It was installed in Los Angeles. So that's the 29th of November, 1927. That's just a few years after that sign would have debuted. This is well within living memory, and that's what this advertisement from a related company is saying. Even earlier, August 1927, in Signs of the Times, this man, F.A. Orff, worked for Federal Electric. Federal Electric had the Claude Neon franchise for the Midwest. So this, again, is a sister company to Claude Neon of France. What Orff says is interesting because it's a little bit different. He says, what was perhaps the first neon sign erected in this country was the Packard sign manufactured in Paris, brought to San Francisco by Earl C. Anthony. It was placed on the home of Packard Motors in San Francisco in 1922. The sign read Packard Earl C. Anthony Incorporated. The word Packard predominated the sign, while Earl C. Anthony Inc. appeared directly beneath the word Packard and was apparently Mr. Anthony's handwritten signature. The sign was 40 feet long and 20 feet high. Considerable interest was created along Van Ness Avenue with the appearance of the Packard sign. So that's the earliest source that we could find. It's still not a 1922 or 1923 source, right? So where did all these ideas come from about this photograph and connecting the sign to Los Angeles? So we tried to track that down. Okay, well, this is a picture, obviously, of a Packard neon sign over a doorway. It's on a building, this building, that wasn't built until 1929. So under no circumstances was this photograph taken in 1922 or 1923, right? That's not possible because the doorway didn't exist. Here, at the opening, this is from the Clippings album, this is the opening of the building in 1929. You can see the sign right here. These are the garage entrances to the Earl C. Anthony building. So there's the sign, like on opening day. You can see in this photograph, a little bit later, probably still 1929, they moved the sign, now it's over the doorway. Here's the doorway, and there's the sign right there. Okay, so now 1929, the building opens, the sign's eventually up over the doorway by like 1929 or maybe early 1930. In case you're wondering, these are the KFI Packard radio towers. You can see two towers on the top of the building. This is 10th and Hope. The antenna spanning between the towers. This is a very prominent feature in the downtown landscape. And you can see the sign here that says KFI Packard. And just in case you thought maybe that snuck in and that was the first neon sign, those are incandescent. They're light bulbs. So you can see here, you can kind of see the dots. You can kind of see the dots. A little hard to see on this image, but they are light bulb signs, they're incandescent, and they're not neon signs. Okay, so let's go back to this one. Where literally did this photograph come from? This photograph came out of Earl C. Anthony's personal album. Earl C. Anthony's personal 50th anniversary album for the 50th anniversary of his Packard dealership. It's in the collection of a man named Earl Rubinstein. He's a car collector as well. And he has Earl C. Anthony's actual album that has that photograph in it. What's interesting about it is the back. Because the back makes some really interesting claims. Now remember, this is from the 50s, right? The 50th anniversary album. This is from the mid-50s. And it says, Earl C. Anthony, California Packard distributor, father of neon lighting on the West Coast. Anthony went to France to attend the Paris Automobile Show held after World War I. There he saw for the first time the new neon light in operation. He ordered 3 signs with the Packard script, acquired the neon franchise for California, Arizona, and Nevada. When the 3 signs arrived, what? Want me to skip ahead? All right. Okay, so I'll go piece by piece and look at this. Okay, it says he attended the Paris Automobile Show after the war. The first one was in 1919. There's no evidence in the Clippings albums that he went in 1919. There is evidence that he went in 1922 because he was interviewed quite a bit when he returned, talking about what the car business was like in Europe. So there's no evidence that he actually went to the 1919 show. It says he acquired the Neon franchise from California, Arizona, and Nevada. That was a company called Electrical Products. It says it down here again. He organized the Electrical Products Company. There's no evidence that he was actually on the board of Electrical Products. Electrical Products was the Claude Neon franchise for the West Coast. There was a lot of publicity about Electrical Products when they organized in Los Angeles in 1925. The Los Angeles Times ran a big article and included the list of board members. Signs of the Times ran a blurb that included the list of board members. And Earl C. Anthony, prominent citizen, is not on the board. Okay, so there's no evidence that he had anything to do with the founding of Electrical Products Company or serving on their board, even in an advisory capacity. Then it says, okay, the three signs. One was installed above the entrance to the Anthony Building on South Hope Street. Well, we know that wasn't until after 1929, because that building didn't exist until 1929. Okay? Then another was placed atop a building on West 7th Street. This is actually where all the action is centered around the first neon sign, because supposedly 7th and Flower is where the first neon sign was. But as we're going to show in a, oh sorry, this is the, that's the 1929 building. 7th and Flower, that doesn't happen until after December 1924. I'll show you that, we'll go through that in just a minute. Then finally, they even claim demand for the neon product was instantaneous, and Anthony was swamped by successive appeals for early delivery of neon signs, without allowing the neon business to interfere with his motor car business, motor stage lines, chain of national service stations. He organized the Electrical Products Company and proceeded with competent personnel to neonize cities, towns, villages, as well as hot dog stands, service stations, motels, and whatever, along the highways and byways of the wide-sprawled region of Western America. But neon did not catch on fast at all. No. Even by 1929, it hadn't caught on that much yet. Neon didn't really peak in this country until it became dominant as a form of signage, electrical signage, probably by the late 1930s, and maybe not even until into the 1940s. So it took a very long time for neon to actually catch on, and that's based on the research that we've been doing together for the last couple of years. So demand for neon grew only slowly. So this self-authored caption by the Earl C. Anthony folks is full of a lot of really major problems. Trouble is, they didn't keep it to themselves. This is that 50th anniversary edition of Signs of the Times, where that photograph of the sign over the doorway first appears. Signs of the Times was they were celebrating their 50th anniversary, and they had a big issue on the history of electrical signage. And interestingly, the text of the history itself doesn't mention the Earl C. Anthony Packard sign, but this caption does. And when you read it, I won't bother to go through the whole thing, but when you read it, it makes all the same claims that are from the back of the photo, because they probably got sent, it's the same photo, they got sent the same photo. They say it was the first neon sign, they say that it was in 1922, they say it was on 7th and Flower, they say that it created a sensation, they say that it ended up later over the entrance door, and that it was displayed, an interesting tidbit, they say that we claim that the sign was displayed at the 50th anniversary banquet. It says right here, Electrical Products Corporation displayed this sign at the banquet at the Beverly Hills Hotel for the 50th anniversary of Earl C. Anthony Packard. Well, actually, that might be true. There was a Packard sign hanging at the Beverly Hills Hotel on the occasion of the Earl C. Anthony Packard 50th anniversary. That's Mr. Anthony speaking, and obviously a Packard sign behind him. And if you look at the scale, it's possible that that's the same sign. They themselves say that they had replaced the glass tubing that had broken. It's that, so the glass tubing they say is new, but they say that the metal framework is original. Okay, so that could be right. But remember, the sign doesn't go up over the doorway until after 1929 because the building didn't exist. So under no circumstances would it have been first at that point. So where did Signs of the Times get this information? Well, yeah, it's from Earl C. Packard.
Sorry.
It's from Earl C. Packard. These are the acknowledgments for that special issue, and they say thanks to firms in the field, some of whom cooperated with information, and Earl C. Incorporated Los Angeles is the second one to be thanked. Okay, so we've already uncovered several problems, but what on earth happened at the corner of 7th and Flower, where every source cites this sign debuted? Okay, well, so then we turn to a little used and highly treasured air photo collection, the Benjamin and Gladys Thomas Air Photo Archives. They're held in the Department of Geography at UCLA. It's a private air photo archive. You have to pay to access it and pay to make digitized copies, unless you're a geographer and got your degree from that department. These are air photos that were taken from between 1917 and about 1972, and they're all over the city. It's a phenomenal collection. There are a lot from downtown, but you know, it's happenstance. They fly when they fly, and sometimes the sky is really clear and the airplane's nice and low. Sometimes the sky is hazy, or sometimes the airplane's kind of high. So what you can see depends on the day and where they pointed the camera, right? And this is what the air photos look like. But what I'm going to do here is zoom in. This is the target area around the corner of 7th and Flower. So I'm going to take you on a tour through time of what happens on that corner, okay? This is 1921. So this is before there was any talk of there being a neon sign on this corner. But I just want to show you how you can spot the corner, because Mark's Flats is a very distinctive Victorian building with the articulated roof line. So you can often see the bumpiness of that roof line. And it's kitty corner to the sign. This is the roof where the sign is supposed to have been. And you can also see this Lincoln dealer. Who was it?
Oh, that was a Studebaker.
No, it was Lincoln during this time. It was Hoffman Studebaker later. So this is a Lincoln dealer, and he had a test track on the roof, which I think is really cool. But it's a really big building, so you can recognize and you can see that you sort of triangulate between the Lincoln dealer and Mark's Flats. Okay, so here's 1922. Okay, 1922. The roof, the northwest corner, the roof where the sign is supposed to be. It's not there yet in 1922, but you can see it's an empty roof. There's no neon sign, empty roof. Okay, that's a nice clear photo. Here's the 10th of June, 1923, halfway through the year when the sign supposedly debuted. This photograph, it's a hazier day, and it's a higher flight. It's a little bit harder to see, but there's the building. This is the building. There's a little dark thing right there. You can see by mid-1923, there are billboards up here, 3 billboards, 2 billboards here. So there are billboards up, but they're ordinary. They appear to be ordinary billboards. Let's look a little bit later and see what starts happening. Here too, there's Mark's Flats, there's the Lincoln dealer, and there's the corner, right? February 1924. There's no big neon sign that says Packard on that corner. You can see it very clearly in this photograph. The 13th of June, 1924. This is this billboard right here that we can see the back of. That's the one that would have been the supposed neon sign, because it supposedly faced the street corner. So that's the one, but you can see from these other billboards, these are not illuminated billboards. They're just paper and paint. They're paper and paint billboards. When you go to July 1924, now it's a year and a half into this sign already was supposed to have debuted, and there again, the back of an ordinary billboard. But in December of 1924, I found a building permit. Went to building and safety because, as Paul pointed out, when you build a big sign like that, you have to get a permit. So I went to building and safety, and here's December 1924, Foster and Kleiser, the billboard company, they get a permit to extend an all-metal sign per the attached plans of course are on, by extending an existing structure by 5 feet. So they're basically getting a permit to build a bigger billboard. And this is the 2nd of December, 1924. Remember, the claims around the first neon sign are for 1922 and 1923. By 1924, there are already other neon signs, particularly in New York City, but they're also going up in Los Angeles. Here it is, the last month of the year, and they get a permit. What happens? The next air photo we have is February, 2nd of February, 1925, and you can now see that larger billboard. See how it sticks up here on the side? It's taller now than the one that's next to it, and there's this weird thing. See how it's catching the light right there? It could be an electrical box. It could be an electrical box. It's a little hard to say. It could be an electrical box. But then it turns out there's actually a photograph of the front of the billboard. That's it. This then is the only photograph ever shown of the Earl C. Anthony Packard sign on 7th and Flower. The only one anyone has ever found, and no one's ever shown this photograph before, except when I showed it to the Palisades Historical Society a couple weeks ago. What do you see? It's hard to make out. Let's go through it. First of all, you can see that it's an illuminated billboard because it's got spotlights on the bottom and the top. That's what those little notch-looking things are. They're spotlights. It's so hard to see because it's a bit of a blurry, hazy photograph. It's the best we have. It looks like a pole or a tower, some lines radiating downward from it, and then a box. Maybe with some writing in it. It's pretty darn hard to see. I mean, I've blown it up really big, and it looks like a box with some writing in it, but you can't read it. So what could it be? Well, first of all, billboards in the 1920s did have neon on them. So it is possible that this was a billboard that had neon on it. Here's some examples. And they also had spotlights, so that is in keeping with what we appear to be looking at. But what did the Earl C. Anthony Packard advertising campaign look like in the mid-1920s? Fortunately, there are better examples of other Earl C. Anthony billboards. This one, for example, Wilshire and Western, so not 7th and Flower, 1927. Here's an Earl C. Anthony billboard. It's got the KFI radio towers, and there's the antenna, and then the lightning bolts, and suspended from the lightning bolts is the Packard logo. Okay? So it's towers, lightning bolts, wires, Packard logo. Here's another one. This is a year earlier, 1926. So there's no way the first neon sign, but it's just what Earl C. Anthony was doing for their ads. 2 radio towers, the antenna between the towers, lightning bolts, the Packard logo suspended on lightning bolts between the towers. Right? And it is all Foster and Kleiser advertising, the same people who pulled the permit on 7th and Flower. Interestingly, there's a really cool shot in the Security Pacific National Bank collection in Los Angeles Public Library of the guys painting that billboard. And what you can see, check it out, the guy's holding on to something three-dimensional. When you zoom in really close, you can see it's a metal frame, and you can see the glass tubing of the neon sign.
Yeah.
This sign was a neon sign. This Packard sign, remember this is later, this is 1926. This Packard billboard had neon on it. Absolutely, positively. But now let's look at the scale. The guy, let's say that guy is 6 feet tall, just as a rough estimate. That would make the sign roughly 8 feet tall, right? I mean, it's way bigger than a guy, right? Go back to the... Not the same, right? Not the same sign. Absolutely no way, even if, right, under no circumstances. So even if this is, you know, they took the glass off of 7th and Flower and then they put it on Wilshire and it never made it into the Beverly Hills Hotel. Okay, so, and this one over the door, because this could be the one over the door, but if this one over the door wasn't the one on the billboard, right? So it's then possible that this is the Packard billboard, and that it's got neon on it, and it looks like their campaign. It's a radio tower with antennas and the Packard logo. That's what I think we're looking at, right? But that was under no circumstances the first neon sign in America, because the building permit wasn't pulled until the 2nd of December in 1924. By then, even if they put it up on the 3rd of December, which, you know, people don't work too hard in December, but let's say they did. By December 1924, it wasn't the first neon sign in the US under any circumstances. This billboard lasted for a while, but by 1930, well, the whole block looks different, and so does the billboard. So what then? It's not on 7th and Flower, but where is it? Well, remember Orth, right? Our man Orth, remember he said it was in San Francisco. And remember this clipping? In 1922 in San Francisco, Earl C. Anthony separated new and used car sales. Well, here's his new car dealership. Big building on Van Ness Avenue in San Francisco. Van Ness Avenue, remember, and he was selling Packard and Willys Overland out of the same building. So, and that wasn't unusual in those days for car dealers to represent multiple marks in the same building, in the same dealership. This was what was called Auto Row in those days. It's a slightly later photo. All the big car dealers were on that street in those days. If we look closely at this photo, the photograph is not dated. But if we look closely, it's a beautiful image that's very clear. And what we can see is all the cars, we can see their license plates really, really well. In those days, for those of you that know cars, you got a new license plate, not just a new tag, you got a new plate every year, and they were always changing the colors. And through this period, the late teens and through the mid-20s, the only year that had a dark license plate background with light numbers was 1923. And all the license plates are 23 plates. So this photograph was taken in 1923, and it shows 1, 2, 3 signs. Isn't that interesting? Well, take a look at these. This gets really, really interesting and maybe speculative. Okay, Earl C. Anthony Incorporated, that is his signature. Remember, Orth said the sign was supposedly his signature. That is his signature. And Packard, the logo. And they are electrified. You can see the conduit running to them. Are these neon signs or are they incandescent signs? Well, you can't tell because you can't see light bulbs or neon. But if you think about it from a design and maintenance perspective, it's almost impossible that these would be incandescent signs because there isn't really any way to service the light bulbs. And one of the reasons why neon eventually took over incandescent signs is for lower maintenance. With light bulb signs, you're constantly having to change the bulbs. And in these signs, you wouldn't be able to change the bulbs. Whereas neon needs very little or in many cases no service, right? You probably heard about the Clifton sign that was supposedly on for however many, 40 years or whatever, 70 years. Right, so neon needs very little and sometimes no maintenance. Now these are not the kind of neon signs we're accustomed to looking at because we think of old neon as neon exposed tubing, right? And this is behind glass. We'll talk about that more in a moment, but because remember there's 3 signs here. So what about this one? What does it say? Well, we reversed the image and stretched it to make up for the perspective that it's on. What does it say? What does it say? Overland. It doesn't say Packard, it says Overland, the other car he was selling, right? I mean, that's not a P, that's an O. Unfortunately, the Packard logo and the Overland logo are almost the same. They end in a D that had a flag on it. They have a tall ascender in the center and a big fat first letter, but it's not Packard, it's Overland. So much for that. Overland, interestingly though, had one of the earliest neon signs in New York City. One of the first big neon signs made by Claude Neon Lights in New York was an Overland sign in 1924. Was the Overland's roof sign, was it neon? Was it light bulbs? No way of telling because all we can see is the back. So we don't know. So what about these? Well, we think that these are neon signs. We've shown them to so many people in the industry. We believe that these are neon signs, and when we show them and talk it through with people in the industry, they all come to agree. But what did early neon look like? Because this is so early. If this is the first neon sign in the US, it's the first neon sign in the US. There wasn't already an established idea of what that was about. Check this out. This is Claude Neon in 1911, soon after he developed the kind of electrode that would make neon possible, illuminating a church. No exposed tubing. I like the sort of hell color too, but this is not exposed tubing. We're used to, when we think of neon today, we think of exposed tubing. That's not this. Here again, the Paris Automobile Show in 1913, so before the war. These lights, can't quite see it on the resolution of this screen, but these are incandescent lights. These big ones are incandescent lights. It's the red that's the neon. Again, it's like cove lighting. It's not exposed tubing. It's not exposed tubing. The other thing, early neon, they didn't have what we call blockout paint, the black paint that paints out the spaces between letters. And they later developed, well, eventually they developed blockout paint. They also had blockout glass, dark black glass that they would weld on so that you wouldn't read the connecting between letters. So in early neon signs, you had to either have continuous script or you had to have completely separate units of neon. Nowadays, they would just have two letters and connect them with black, so you don't see that they're connected. They couldn't do that. Look at this early neon sign from Claude Neon, the developer of neon in France. It's a bit hard to see because it's a color image where the neon has been hand tinted, but it appears to be neon behind glass. And what you can see is the script words, it's continuous, and then in the all caps, those are individual. They're not connected. The neon's not continuous there. So you can see that old style that they're using. So maybe early neon didn't show the tubes. Maybe only we like that later. Maybe they didn't like that in the beginning, right? And that part has been lost. That part of neon's history has basically been forgotten about because exposed neon became so dominant for so long. Well, what about Orth's thing that he said the sign was really, really big? He said it was 20 by 40? 20 by 40 feet. Check this out. This is Union Square, San Francisco. Unfortunately, the earliest photo we've been able to find the mid-1930s. Packard, and then you can't quite read it, Earl C. Anthony's signature. Well, in the 40s, 30s, and 40s, it would have been neon. How old is that sign? Don't know. Don't know. San Francisco Building and Safety isn't as cooperative as the one in Los Angeles. So don't know how old that is. Maybe that was the first big one and the other two, and those are the three ones they ordered. Maybe. So maybe this is what Orth was talking about. When he said the sign was 40 feet long and 20 feet high. That could easily be 40 by 20. It's possible. So maybe San Francisco had the first neon signs in the US. But to really answer that question, you have to answer another question. You have to answer, what is a neon sign? Does it have to be outside? Does it have to be sold for profit in a commercial venture? Does it have to be filled with neon gas? Right? So for example, in 1909, these guys, Medine and Trimble, made this sign for the Ingersoll Watch Company. The sign was displayed indoors. It's luminous tubing. It was displayed indoors. It ran for a couple of years. It was displayed in the company offices. And it's little. It's probably about this big. They might have sold it, but it wasn't. It was advertising their product. Do you count that as a neon sign? Would that be the first neon sign in the U.S. Ingersoll, 1909? Maybe. Go back further. The National Bureau of Standards, to celebrate the Louisiana Purchase Centennial Exposition in St. Louis, 1904. These signs are still in the collection of the Smithsonian Institution. NBS, National Bureau of Standards, and Helium. Now, they didn't sell these signs. These are not a commercial venture. They were just advertising themselves. Does that count as a neon sign? Is that the first neon sign? Go back farther. Daniel McFarland Moore. He perfected early luminous tubing in the 1890s. And his main thing was that he was lighting buildings and rooms from above in the way that we now would light industrial space with fluorescent tubing. He was doing it with another kind of luminous tubing that maybe you could call neon tubing. But he also did some work that was representational. He also did some stuff like the welcome sign. Oh, see, here's his tubing lighting his workshop, and there's his lit sign that said welcome in 1896, right? 1896. Is that the first neon sign in the United States or the world? It's certainly earlier than Claude Neon in Paris, but what about Nikola Tesla? We know that the world's favorite mad scientist had developed luminous tubing, and that he did display some form of luminous tubing at the World's Columbian Exposition in 1893. We know that he did that. There's this photograph, this image of some of the stuff that he did. He did two things though. He did some stuff where he lit wires with so much electricity that they glowed, and other stuff where he lit tubing. So, like, some of this stuff could be luminous tubing. This can't. Some of it can't be. Just technically it can't be. But some of it could be. So was Tesla, did Tesla make the world's first neon sign? That's up to you. That depends on what you think a neon sign is, right? Did it have to have neon in it? Did it have to be sold for profit? Does it have to be representational and say something? Does it have to be outside, or can it be inside, right? But in any case, we know it's not this one. And we know it's not this one. And we know that even though this is the only photograph that's ever been found of the Packard sign on 7th and Flower, it definitely was not the first neon sign in the United States, because by December 1924, it was no longer first. Even if you discredit Tesla and National Bureau of Standards and all the others. Could this be neon? Well, it could be, but we may never be able to answer that question because we can't look inside anymore, right? It's gone. So some of these questions can't be answered, but we still have to answer the other questions first. Are all those other earlier signs, are they neon? Do they count? What is a neon sign? And what really does all this mean? Well, the point really is, in the era of the internet, it has changed the way we do research in so many ways. So often we can just Google something and it's so easy. But we just can't stop there, right? We can't take for granted what we read on the internet, and we can't take for granted what we read anywhere. That's the same old story that we've been learning since forever, and it's only more true now, right? If you see a story that sounds like a terrific story, and nobody references it to any originary primary source, maybe you better start asking some questions, right? That's what we did, and that's what we found. Thanks. So this is a talk based on our research that doesn't have an answer, but we'll try to answer your question.
It's not really a historical question. It's a technical question about illuminated tubing. I was led to believe there's different gases give off different colors.
True.
Can you talk more about that?
Sure, give that one to Paul.
Yeah, every gas burns a different spectrum. Some of the spectrums are so close that you wouldn't even notice, but the reason they use neon is because it burns red. Argon burns pale blue. When you see a pale blue sign that you can barely read, that's argon. In order to give it a little kick, they put a little drop of mercury, makes it brighter.
Bluer.
Helium burns a certain color, krypton burns a certain color, you know.
Krypton's very blue. Krypton's a very pretty midnight blue, but it's very dim.
Yeah.
Helium is an orangey yellow, and it's also very dim.
Most
And
neons-
xenon is the other gas that's commonly used, which is also bluish and it's very dim.
But you can burn oxygen. It burns white, but it burns out quickly.
Yeah, it doesn't last.
Yeah. So most neon signs that you see nowadays, new stuff, is mercury, argon, or neon. Those are the two most common ones. And usually they're in a fluorescent tube, which kicks the brightness even up a little more.
A tube that has fluorescent powders added to the inside so that it just goes shoo when it's hit with all that electricity. Yeah.
Is there any clearinghouse to access personal photographs? from the era that might depict the neon?
Well, there's a lot of stones that still could be turned over, but to me, based on a building permit from the 2nd of December 1924 and an air photo from early 1925, and that chain of air photos, no sign, no sign, no sign, no sign, sign. I don't need to go on a wild goose chase. I hope that somebody else will. The research that we just presented, this took an entire year. So this is in multiple archives in person in Los Angeles and in the Bay Area. And of course, a lot of these archives are digitizing images and putting them online. So it's online as well as in-person searches of at least 10 different places. So it's really a lot of work already. So you're right. It's possible that somebody took a snapshot that has that billboard in the background. But those kinds of photographs, to the degree that they're online, they're not searchable for something like Packard billboard or something, right? More and more collections are being posted online, like the Edison collection that the Huntington recently posted. What they do, which is what all the repositories are doing now, they'll take a picture, like, they'll just look at, this, okay, say this picture, and they'll put in the description any keyword they can find. Packard, James Donahue, public market, bakery, anything they can read, they'll put that in the description so that later when you're searching on bakery, you'll find this picture under bakery. Right? More and more people are doing that, but it turns up so many things that aren't what you want that it's a pretty labor-intensive search process.
I think the answer is yes, there's always more.
Yeah, there's always more chances, but I don't believe that there are any more chances for the Packard billboard because we already know it wasn't there. Yeah.
Is it possible that San Francisco Building and Safety, if you can ever penetrate that, they could explain the Van Ness one?
Yeah, it's possible. Well, it wasn't, remember, the sign permits don't have to, in most municipalities, they still don't have to specify how a sign is illuminated. They need to know if it's electrified or not, so they wouldn't have to say neon or luminous tubing versus light bulbs or incandescent. And a lot of municipalities, they didn't have to have sign permits at all in the 20s. That didn't develop until later. So San Francisco, for example, has very poor records for sign permits for the 1920s.
And very poor handlers.
Yeah.
Sign records that can do that.
Right. So when I went and asked for sign records for Van Ness for the whole decade of the 1920s, I got the 1930s instead, which was not useful. Yeah.
Was Claude Neon the only company that was importing or exporting to, as a franchise, is that really the only company that had signs in America, or were there other companies? And can't you search somehow? Do they have any records?
Wouldn't that be great? Yeah. I've been to some. So Claude Neon in France, they're really the ones who Claude Neon developed the patents that made the electrode and the extraction of the gas from air possible. So they made commercial neon signs doable. If Tesla made one, it was an experiment, and he wasn't selling them all over the place that said open, right? So all those other ones were experiments, they were one-offs. What Claude Neon made possible was that it could be manufactured and sold, right? But George Claude, the founder of Claude Neon, he was a Nazi sympathizer during the war, and none of his records survived. He went to prison. He died years later, but none of the records of his business in France really have survived. I've been through the finding aids there are 2 collections of his papers in France, and there's no indication that there's any records from the teens or 20s from the businesses. That same is true for all the Claude Neon franchises in the US, whether it's Neon Lights in New York, Electrical Products, any of those companies. They have very, very spotty records. I've contacted them all, and they don't have records that far back. And of course, the US companies didn't make the supposed original signs for Earl C. Anthony. So was Claude Neon the only company? Initially, they were, but very rapidly they had a lot of competition. And all throughout the decade in the 1920s, one reason why neon didn't pick up as quickly as it might have is because Claude Neon held the patents, and you had to work under those expensive patents. And they fought patent wars all through the 1920s with different people developing different weird electrodes so that they could run around the patents. And eventually, by the early 30s, the patent wars were resolved, and and the patents were released. And that's why neon really took off in the 1930s. That and WPA assistance. So, yeah.
In looking at where this came from, supposedly imported from France, did you happen to come across, like, is there a standard pattern for, let's say, giant signs or big objects coming from Europe into the United States to the West Coast? They go where they come in, they go through the Panama Canal,
That's hard to answer. I mean, anything that's going to come from Europe to the West Coast is going to go through the Panama Canal.
At that time.
Yeah.
Since the canal was open.
Because they certainly can't put it on an airplane, and they're not going to truck it across the country, something that big. So it would have come on a boat through the Panama Canal, but records, don't know.
Yeah, there's no way of knowing what shipping company would have been used, if that shipping company still exists or anything. There's no paper trail there at all. And of course, the Earl C. Anthony organization no longer exists, and what was left of their records, all that's left of their records are those clippings albums. The other records of what cars they sold or anything else for their business is long gone. So that was destroyed a long time ago. Yeah.
What are you going to do with this information?
That's a great question. We wrote an article for Signs of the Times that'll come out in December. So that addresses the sign industry, the people that are very vested in this story. I wrote an article for a scholarly journal in my discipline, and we're talking about writing another paper for another magazine somewhere. We just haven't decided. So we both want to disseminate this information because everybody, I believed it. I believed that the Earl C. Anthony Packard neon sign was the first neon sign in the U.S. It's a great story. I wanted to believe it. I'm from here. I wanted it to be true, but it's not. Now I want people to understand that it's not true, and maybe somebody else will help us sort out which one was first. Was it Tesla? That would be cool. I'm okay with Tesla.
Hey, so one last question, off topic, but germane to where we are. Los Angeles Theater across the street. Early neon sign as part of the marquee.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's all.
Oh, okay.
People walk outdoor of this building.
It's no longer that early because by the time that theater was built, neon was pretty much accepted way of doing marquees.
Okay. So it is an integral part of the marquee, but it wasn't really early.
Yeah, it wasn't revolutionary. It was modern, but not revolutionary. Because probably by that time there must have been 400, 500, 600 neon signs around town.
I don't know when the Los Angeles Theater was.
31.
29?
31.
Oh yeah, neon, it was neon everywhere.
I think the thing that's unique about it is that they integrated the signage into the facade. And that
This was part of the design. It wasn't a tack on.
Yeah.
But by the early 30s, that is what architects and designers were doing. And when they designed, particularly on theater marquees, they designed the whole marquee with neon in mind from the outset. But that was not unusual. That was light bulbs. They did that too. Theater signs were always big, well thought out.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, on the way in, I noticed they're working on the Rialto.
Yeah, we saw that.
And I'm just curious about the process that they have to
Rotten
use.
bastards didn't hire me.
They were testing all the tubes, like very few were even showing any light at all.
Yeah.
Are the tubes actually salvageable? Or do they
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It depends on what they're made out of. What happens is if they're fluorescent tubes, which is the paint coating, they're under a vacuum, and if they break, it blows all the paint coating out. And at that point, you must make a new one. If it's clear and it hasn't been exposed to the weather, it's usually pretty good. If it gets exposed to the weather, it gets stained, and then you must make a new one.
And the other thing is that some neon shops will not repair tubing that has had mercury in it, because in order to, when you make neon, you have to use stucco. Typically, tube benders will stick a blow hose in their mouth at the other end and one end of the tubing, because when they're bending it over the fire, they have to put a little puff of air in there to keep the tube from deflating and collapsing. And so then you've got your mouth connected to where the hot mercury is. So a lot of tube benders refuse to work with tubing that has had mercury in it. They'll throw it out and make it new.
But also the other thing is that glass is so cheap that it's almost not worth your time to repair it. Yeah.
There's 2 restaurants that claim to have invented the French dip sandwich. Is there a second choice for first?
What is a French dip sandwich? I've never heard.
That's where they put the bread and juice.
They dip it in Frenchman?
And they both have nice old neon signs.
But the idea is there someone who is in there for second neon sign, or who also was a rival to Packard, or
Well, it's a really
number 2?
good question. Who was the second neon sign? If Packard isn't first, and never mind about Tesla and Moore and all those other ones.
Packard could be the second too.
Yeah, Packard could be second. The interesting thing is that when neon started in the US, nobody made those claims. No, it didn't come in with a bang, it came in with a whisper. Nobody started saying, hey, guess what? I've got this big new thing! You're gonna love it! They started, Signs of the Times didn't report on neon until, and they said, well, there's this really interesting thing. It's called luminous tubing and there's no wire. It's really weird.
The introduction of neon really goes, could you go to that picture? The introduction of neon really would go in with the idea that you couldn't see it. It was just a convenience rather than an art form.
Right.
And then later on they went, hey, actually we could do this kind of bitchin' thing with it. And then they got into block out and they go, well, now we can spell things with it. And that's when it started to take off. So that kind of sign is keeping with, well, we just snuck this thing in when no one was watching.
Right, it's lower maintenance, so let's do it this way.
And
so we think of it now, I mean, I don't think there's any way to trace what the second one would have been because they weren't reported on. Nobody cared.
Somebody wanted a question back.
Do you know, or what do you think was the nature of the lighting on the Richfield Tower and the Richfield building that ever had?
That's like 27 or 28.
I thought Richfield was neon, but
1929.
29.
Gordon, can you describe the sign for people who don't know?
Sorry?
Can you describe that sign for people who aren't familiar with it?
Well, the old Richfield building was a beautiful architectural building that was built in 1929 and had a tower on top of it that was an oil derrick. And it said Richfield, and lighting went up the sides of the derrick to the top where it reached a ball that would light up with rays of light that came out, and then it would repeat.
yeah, there's Signs of the Times did mention that sign, but I can't remember if they said that it was neon or incandescent. I can look it up.
I would actually be surprised by that time if it was incandescent.
Yeah, I would think it would be neon
Because of maintenance.
Yeah, maintenance on a tower, and by 1929 it was probably neon.
Just remember to be careful to trust sites and times and resources.
Yes. Well, what's interesting is that the part that they got wrong was the caption that they quoted directly from Earl C. Anthony. The rest of their research was very good. So, yeah, I can.
Okay, so when you submitted this piece to them and you told them I'm debunking a myth that you spread, what did the editor say?
Well, and Signs of the Times is interesting because it's been in the same family. The editorship has been in the same family for 4 generations. So,
And he's not a real big talker.
no.
He's kind of
When we gave this presentation to the editor and some of the other writing and editorial staff, and these are people that have been around the sign business for decades, and they've traveled around sign shops all over the country. They really know the industry extremely well, and they know their own history very well. And they were skeptical at first, and by the time we started looking at this, they were like, wow. So they're going to run the piece, and they believe it.
And they're going to run it next to the guy that says that it was on 7th Flower. So he wrote an article.
Yeah.
7th Flower. He wrote an article also. And they're
there's
running
going to be
both
2
of them
stories.
together.
I think one more question. Officially wrap it up.
You have one? Yeah.
There is a museum of neon in
Yes.
Los Angeles.
Yes.
Where do they weigh in? Where do they weigh in?
Well, I'm their vice president. currently just moved into a facility in Pomona. That's a temporary facility. It's going to be in Glendale in a couple of years as soon as the building is built. And they've been very interested to follow this research, and I'm presenting it for our board, or we're presenting it for the Museum of Neon Arts board on Tuesday night. So I don't think any board members are here today because they're all going to show up on Tuesday, right? Yeah. So
Ask
they
on
will.
Wednesday.
Yeah, ask me on Wednesday.
Thank you. We're going to have you back for you to talk about Ramona in 2014. Paul, thank you. Thank you. That's it. If you're on my walking tour, we'll get started in about 15-20 minutes. Thanks. Next month, Ethereus Society and the Pickleworks Building and a history of the Arts District. So we'll see you then. Gene, it's great to see you. Okay, good job. Good work. And you guys are here. And Brent, where's Brent? Everyone thank Brent again. Both sets of speakers are here if you have questions. So start asking.